Welcome to Cracking Culture Change. My name is Ella, and today we are going to discuss sacrificing sacred cows and breaking sector norms to attract talent and thrive. My guest today is James Brown, co-founder and partner of Hall Brown, a family law firm with offices in Manchester, London, Sheffield and Leeds. I was really keen to speak to James because he and his partner Sam have built an incredible culture out of their experiences of what they didn't want it to be like. I hope you enjoy today's episode. I'll catch up with you at the end and share my reflections. James, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you with us. I'd love to kick off, James, by just hearing a bit about your journey to founding or co-founding Hall Brown.
So I think it's, a lot of people would sit and say, it's always been a dream of mine to have my own business or my own firm or whatever it is. And that's sort of true, but sort of not true. So when I was a trainee back in the kind of London's leading family law firm, one of the other trainees' dad happened to own kind of top end boutique family law firm. And I thought he was, the coolest thing ever. So I'd sort of in the back of my mind thought, God, wouldn't it be great to, do what he's done? But I never really seriously thought that would be an ambition that I could realise. So I did the kind of normal route of trainee, solicitor, climbing the rung to becoming a partner, and then was knocking on the door of being an equity partner. And at that point, obviously, you got to make a decision because the firm I was at, like lots of firms, you have to raise capital or take a loan, which usually the firm organises for you to essentially buy a stake in a business. So at that point, you are becoming an owner. Alongside me was my now business partner, Sam. He was a partner in the same firm, and we got on incredibly well personally. And as we got to know each other better personally, we also saw that we kind of had similar values in terms of how we wanted to run a team, etc. And it rapidly became clear that a lot of ways that law firms were doing things were ways we wouldn't want to do it. So things came to a head at that point because we had to make a decision as to whether we were going to buy in. We're very fortunate in that we have my wife and his partner have jobs which are, remunerated well enough that we could meet our outgoings and nursery fees and mortgages and all of that stuff. So we were able to take a gamble in a way that perhaps others wouldn't be. We also are kind of quite conservative in terms of what we spend. We didn't set up a law firm to get rich or buy a Porsche or whatever it is that some lawyers seem to find important. So we had very similar financial values, and we had our own money kind of saved up. So we knew that we weren't going to have to take a gamble. So I had some of my savings, he had his savings. We were both willing to put our house up as our house. That's how we lived together. We each had a home that we were able to put up. And it would be fine if we did live together, for the avoidance of doubt, but we each had a home.
All four of you, happy as ever.
It's like Bert and Ernie. We're like a rubbish Bert and Ernie. And we put those up as collateral. And we said, right, if we do this and we spend all of our savings, then we will call that a day. That will be our cutting off point. So we did it. We set up in 2016, and we're now in 4 cities: Manchester, Leeds, London, and Sheffield. We are knocking on the door of 57 people. And our turnover will be somewhere in the region of £6 million this year. So our savings are safe, I think. But certainly it's much, much bigger than I think perhaps we originally intended with our small boutique of people.
It's fantastic, James. And I can't wait to get under the skin of how culture's helped you do that.
Right.
I'm curious, you mentioned in your story there that you found you and Sam had values in common. Were you aware that they were your values? Did you talk about them as such? What sorts of things were they that you both went, yeah, that's important to me too?
Yeah, I mean, to sort of calling them values almost is in retrospect. What they were at the time was just a moan. This is ridiculous. I can't believe they're doing this. I can't believe they're doing this. And so, and it very quickly became clear that we were saying, look, I think there's things that they're doing wrong here. I mean, law is a very traditional business. It's very hierarchical. You're dealing with people who are by definition relatively bright because you've got to, jump through a lot of academic hurdles to become a lawyer. You are usually dealing with type A personalities because it's, a competitive discipline, particularly in the more litigious arenas. And the individuals themselves are usually quite competitive. in getting a position in a law firm in the first place. And law is a relatively high profit business. So the difficulty with that is, of course, that high profit can actually disguise things that might perhaps be done better. Because in fairness, if you're running a firm that's always been profitable, doing it a certain way, there isn't perhaps the impetus to drive change that you might have if your profits are perhaps heading in the wrong direction. So it's anything kind of that we've done isn't really a criticism of firms we've left. It's just we didn't think that they worked particularly well. When, if you add to that the fact that my wife is a marketing director of a food manufacturing business, it meant that I had a sort of window into businesses which were doing things in a different way. And actually what we're doing, I don't think is that dramatic. It's just we're probably doing what lots of other businesses did years ago, but that other law firms perhaps haven't quite caught up with us. But I mean, they're relatively basic, but became our values, not because we said this is the right way to do it, but as I mentioned in our story, we think this is the wrong way to do it. So the biggest of those is we don't give our lawyers targets. So I would say the majority, it's, you'd say 99%, that's not a hard statistic. The majority of law firms certainly target their lawyers. So what that means is they sit and they say, we expect you to bill and recover a certain number of hours of your time. And traditionally, most law firms, that bracket in the UK is going to be somewhere between 1,400 hours a year and 1,600 hours at the top end. If you go to somewhere like a Magic Circle firm in London, these ones that you hear about in the newspapers that have starting salaries of £1 gazillion, they have targets more like 1,800 hours a year. But we thought these were absolutely pointless because most of the individuals you're recruiting are highly motivated. Most of the individuals are honest, so are going to accurately record what they do anyway. And actually, the vast majority of lawyers, their driver is they just want to do a really, really good job for their client and be a really, really good lawyer. And that kind of idea of all lawyers are bothered about is money is definitely some of those, but like there are in all disciplines. Their driver is, I just want to do a really, really good job. So it followed to us that if you give you don't need to target them for them to do a really good job. And actually all the target becomes is either a temptation to err on the side of perhaps adding an extra minute here, an extra minute there, and erring on the side of caution, should we say? Not fraud, but, not erring on the side of generosity to the client, but erring on the side of generosity to the firm. Or worse, they were recording it and just feeling a huge additional pressure on their mental health. If a lawyer is good and you're giving them the work, they are always going to do enough work to create a profitable business. And if they're not busy enough, particularly the junior ones, that's not their problem. That's your problem as a senior lawyer to feed. So we thought targets were an absolute nonsense and we got rid of them entirely. We've never had targets and I'm never going to have targets. And we are a very commercially successful firm. So I can state categorically that has worked.
Well, just on that one, James, what sort of response do you get from people joining the firm where this is probably the first time, therefore, they've ever worked without targets?
So usually disbelief and suspicion, there must be some sort of, measurement. And to that extent, they're right. When we're doing our budget, we assume that they will recover about 1,000 hours. But they don't get targeted themselves. The heads of office get a kind of heat map, I suppose you could call it, so they can see where people are busier or not busier, so that we can either take work off some people or allocate it to others. But they themselves, the lawyers, they don't have any feel for, whether they're ahead, behind, whatever it might be. And it takes them a good few months to realise that is genuinely the case, that they're not going to get, there's some law firms where you switch off and there is a warning that flashes up on screen which says, are you sure you want to log off because you've only recorded X? There are quite a few law firms, certainly some of our competitors in family law, where they circulate a table every single day to all of the lawyers and everyone's hours are recorded there and colour coded. So if you are below, you are red. If you're above, you're green. And everyone can see what everyone else is doing and what they themselves have done. And we just always felt that was utterly counterproductive.
It's a heck of a culture, that, isn't it? Just to stay with this a minute, because I'm interested to go into even more detail on it. So your forgive me, I can't remember the name. Not heads of department. What was the name of the term?
Yeah, it's kind of team leaders or heads of office. Yeah,
heads of office. Thank you. So they look at their heat map. They think, great. Okay, there's a couple of areas here where perhaps productivity isn't looking as great as it could. What's their approach to sort of looking into that versus say, they don't send the email around with publicly shaming people. How do they go about that in your organization?
So the first thing is we would never use a word like productivity, because we'd assume that everyone is being productive. If you're giving them the work and they're doing a good job for the client, even if you've got 5 clients, if you're doing a good job, you are being productive. We would use the word capacity. So do you have room in your day such that you can take on another client or 2 clients, whatever it might be? Now, this bit goes hand in hand with a communication point within the firm. So the heads of team meet with their team every single Monday. They run through where they are up to and whether or not they feel they've got capacity or not from the fee earners point of view. And that means usually, because those heat maps can be misleading, because it may be that someone looks as though perhaps they're not doing as much chargeable time. But of course, because they're having their weekly sessions with their heads of office, the head of office is able to go, no, don't worry. He gave up a significant amount of time doing a podcast for Ella, last week. So, his numbers are going to be down for Monday the 5th, for example. Or this one is chair of the Manchester Young Solicitors Group at the moment and has got an enormous commitment. So that's why. Because otherwise there's a danger of slipping back into a target culture by the back door, where you just look at that and you go, well, they've got space, so there you go, shove some more clients in their direction. And that's hopefully how you keep on top of the fear that's been protected from that target culture.
Yeah. I love what you're describing, because I firmly believe culture changes through conversation, and your vivid picture of the different kind of conversation and the different language that is used
it's really
around.
Important.
Yes, so important. It sends out a completely different signal. What other? So the targeting people feels like
targets thing that was pretty straightforward.
A sacred cow that was done away with. So what else? What else have you done that's really different?
We sort of have, these are kind of overlapping things, but one of them is around hierarchy and one of them is about communication. So law firms are still old-fashioned, and people work incredibly hard to become lawyers, and they work incredibly hard to become partners. And part of the way they represent that to themselves is, for example, a partner having their own office, for example. There is a law firm who remain nameless, and they give their partners different coloured bins, amazingly. And it's remarkable how strongly those individuals feel about their different coloured bin. I mean, I presume you could buy yourself one from Amazon, but whatever, the point is, and that's not a criticism of the individuals, because we all like to feel that our hard work is recognised in one way or another. But the problem is it creates a real kind of them and us mentality, whether that is them and us between the fee earners and the non-fee earners, or the them and us between partners or non-partners, or whatever it might be. So we try as much as possible to remove what would be kind of obvious distinguishing differentials between people. So, everyone has the same desk, everyone has the same computer, we're completely open plan. If we have an event, for example, let's say we're shortlisted for an award, everyone gets invited, whether you are, an office junior or a partner, it doesn't matter. The entire firm is invited. We regularly do kind of presents on a sort of quarterly basis, or we might celebrate Valentine's Day or whatever it is by delivering something to people's houses. And again, everyone gets the same. If there is a staff bonus, everyone gets the same, because we're trying to keep look, we're all in this together, because, we still kind of think of ourselves as a startup. And then the other side of that, which goes hand in hand with it, is communication. So we found it incredibly annoying to come in on a Monday and find a new person in our team sitting on the desk opposite us. Usually absolutely lovely, often a great recruit, but it was incredibly irritating that even with the title partner, it may not have been communicated to us that this person was landing, for example. So to deal with that, we have an anonymous right of veto. So let's assume someone I want to recruit someone. What we do is we meet with that individual. If we like them and we want to recruit them, we explain to them that they have to go through this anonymous right of veto process. We explain to them what it is, and they either say yes or no. If they say no, they're not right for us. If they say yes, they're great. And then what Sam and I do is we effectively pitch to the entire firm, and we say, right, we'd like to recruit Ella. She does great podcasts. She's, likes culture, et cetera, et cetera. This is the value that we think that she would add. And every single person in the firm is invited to give feedback, and every single person in the office that person's going to be joining has an anonymous right of veto. So they can effectively blackball that individual as long as they've got a decent reason. It has happened twice. We had a very senior lady who had an amazing practice of clients, was lovely to work with if you were a lawyer, but she was absolutely revolting to admin staff. So she didn't get offered a position. And of course, we'd have never found that out had we not had this process. And it was one of our admin team's cousins who had worked at the firm and seen this lady in action on the other side of the floor. And of course, we'd have never found that out. And that actually could have been very quickly had a very damaging impact on the culture that we've tried to build. And the other was a member of the admin team who had a second job that involved the internet, let's say. So we didn't feel was necessarily appropriate for our firm either. So, it works as a thing. But the best thing about it is it keeps us honest, because I don't think in firms where they're not communicating, that's not deliberate. It's just they've got 1,001 things to do, and they communicating with the team is often the last thing on the list, and it can get missed. So what we do is Sam and I do quarterly updates to each area of the firm. I try and speak one-to-one with every single member of staff every week. We have cross-team monthly sessions. So it means you've got you might have a paralegal, a solicitor, an associate, senior associate, and a partner, all going out for lunch every month. And also every single person below partner level has a mentor. And the mentor's job is to focus solely on their career progression. But what that creates is lots and lots and lots of conversations going on throughout the firm. And it's, of course, very difficult for us to not communicate properly in those sessions if I'm going to turn up tomorrow and go, oh, and by the way, we've recruited this individual. Yeah. So that kind of communication side, plus trying to sand away some of those hierarchy differences, have been kind of really important tools, we think. And it's good for us because it keeps us doing it.
Yeah, it keeps you honest, as you say.
Quite.
And accountability for the culture rests with everyone, therefore. Everyone's got skin in the game.
That's exactly right. It's very, with something like that, if you're coming to the firm, it's a really lovely feeling to arrive and know that every single person knows that I'm coming and every single person wants me here. That's a really big thing, particularly if you are joining a more established firm. And a firm, if you're lucky enough to be in tier one like we are, etc., it could be a bit intimidating until you realise, well, no, because everyone wants me here, so they must think that I'm, good enough or whatever, or nice enough to join.
Yes.
And it's also very difficult to moan about someone. We've all been at places, haven't we, where someone's landed, they may not have turned out to be that great, and someone has said, well, if you'd have asked me, I'd have told you, X, Y, and Z. Well, it's difficult for them to moan or say that when, come on, guys, you were given the opportunity to talk about this, and you chose not to raise it.
Yes.
So it means, everyone feels that little bit of ownership in everyone else joining, which is, really nice.
And how was what have the implications been for you as you've grown across multiple offices? So it's a challenge increasingly for organisations post-pandemic who are now working remotely or in a hybrid context. How do you build such a strong cultural identity when you're remote from each other a large part of the time? What's that been like for you?
I would say that's probably the single biggest challenge we have from 2020. So, because we really relied on each other, keeping each other warm, if that makes sense. So rather than it being Sam and I sitting and imposing a culture downwards to keep everyone warm, actually, because of the way people got on, etc., they were all keeping each other warm at the same time. And of course, then when they distributed to 40 different households, that was a really, really difficult challenge, keeping everyone kind of going, in inverted commas. We did it in a kind of few different ways. We did lots of the stuff that everyone did, kind of, your kind of online games and catch-ups, etc., etc. But our single biggest thing probably we did is Sam and I made a commitment on day one that no one was going to get made redundant, no one was going to be furloughed, and no one was going to get a pay cut. And the only reason we could do that, and this comes on to one of our fundamentals, is Sam and I don't pay ourselves anything unless there's actual cash in the bank after we paid tax, paid VAT, and saved. We've got kind of another pot that we save for kind of development, expansion, treats, etc., etc. And only if there's something left do we draw anything. It's because we came of age in 2008. That was when we were sort of a couple of years qualified. And we saw all of these firms go under because essentially they've been greedy. They were always betting on next year's revenue to pay this year's tax. So instead, we're just really old fashioned. We don't have any debt. We move our tax every single month rather than waiting for the tax bill, etc. And because the pandemic hit in April, that would have been around the time coming up to the end of the tax year that Sam and I would have taken dividend, for example. And we said, look, this is what we've got sitting in the firm. We're not going to take anything, and we're going to leave that there to be our cushion because we don't know what rocky times there are going to be ahead. And our commitment to you is that, no one's going to get furloughed, made redundant, and have a pay cut. And so actually that really resonated with people because it was look, we are properly in this together rather than, well, we'll see what happens. And if we struggle, you're getting canned. We tried to do it the other way. And actually it's turned out to be the most effective recruitment tool on the other side, because people can always talk a good game, can't they, when it's flying, but it's when times are difficult that we say you should judge an employer. And so, to be able to say that, and for people from other firms to have seen how we dealt with the team during COVID and lockdown was massive. But where are we now? We're 3 days in, 2 days out, which I think a lot of people are doing.
Yeah.
And then we have core days. So the first thing we did is, as we transitioned out of lockdown, we did an anonymous staff survey every 12 weeks on internal meetings, on how many days in, how many days out, on communication, etc. And then we kind of adjusted it as we went. And the result at the moment, which seems to have been the same the last couple of surveys that we've done, is 3 days in, 2 days out, with some core days. But the core days, interestingly, which seem to be popular, is, for example, the admin team likes to be in on a Wednesday so they can all kind of catch up with each other, swap top tips, probably have a moan about Sam, not about me, obviously, because I'm great, but probably moan about Sam, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how we're doing it at the moment. And that's significantly easier, obviously, than everyone working remotely. But I mean, look, I think we are at the beginning of this transition. I don't think we're at the end. What Apple has just said, they want everyone back in. We already know that Elon Musk has said people need to be in a minimum of 40 hours a week. Goldman's have said, I want everyone back. And it'll be interesting to see how the kind of cost of living crisis hits. Do you want to do you want to warm your home, or do you want to do it on someone else's bill? And I completely understand that, right? If you're a trainee or a young solicitor, makes a real difference to you whether you're heating your house every day, all day.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that, it's
going to be, it's a time of change, isn't it?
It will be really interesting, won't it? Because the direction of travel seemed to be kind of 1 to 2 days a week-ish was where a lot of sectors were going on average. But you're so right. I think the cost of living crisis is going to be an interesting twist on where things might otherwise have gone. Yeah, very interesting. I'm curious to know, again, so interesting what you were saying there, in the spirit of kind of partners paid last rather than partners paid first. And so many of the things you've described sound like they really were countercultural for the sector. I know you said, many of these practices might be normal in other sectors, but they were really new for the legal sector, and they're proving to work for you commercially as well. For someone listening to this, you said at the start, you and Sam are in a really fortunate position where you could say, right, we're going to go and start from scratch, anew, create the culture we want in our own place. For people listening to this where they don't feel they can do that, or they're not in a position to, but they really believe in the principles that you're describing and can see how they would work, but they have perhaps got some partners running the firm or a couple who aren't yet sharing these kind of beliefs about what really drives good business in the longer term. What would your advice be to them about how to go about influencing people's mindsets on this stuff?
So, I mean, the first thing I'd say is there is a golden moment in time if you do want to influence mindset for two reasons. One, because the market is heavily weighted in favor of the employee as opposed to the employer at the moment. You know, everyone is finding a candidate shortage. I don't like using the word candidate, but you know what I mean. There is at the moment, pre-recession, still more work than there are people to do it. So you are in a negotiating position that you may not be in after the recession hits. So do not be afraid to use that. I also think that you should use the exercise almost to stop thinking of yourself in the old-fashioned employee-employer relationship. Because I think if you approach it and you have an adult conversation where, you know, we were doing these 12-week surveys, and we got about 6 weeks in when we were trialing slightly more. We were doing 4 days in and 1 day out at one stage because that's what the results of the survey had said. And all of our paralegals and trainee solicitors and newly qualified solicitors, so the sort of more junior fee earners, got together and they put together this bullet point list as to why they felt that we shouldn't wait for 12 weeks for our next survey. And it was highly persuasive, and we immediately changed it in consultation with the more senior fee earners because of the fact that they'd approached it in a commercial way. So I would say to people, any conversation that you have, go into it as an adult, see yourself as a peer as opposed to an employee, an employer, or a boss and a junior. I think that's absolutely wrong. It's just that you do different roles within the business. So you are a peer within the team. Don't pitch it for you as an individual, but pitch it for partly you in the basis of this is a recruitment tool at the moment, if you get this right, and partly commercially. How can I be sure that what you're asking for isn't just good for you, but is good for the business as well? If you do that and you are ignored, then you should leave because it is not a great culture and they are getting it wrong at the moment. And then the final thing I'd say is don't be afraid either to do it on your own. Yes, we were in a fortunate position, but actually the greatest trick that law firms pull is persuading you that it's impossible to set up on your own. It isn't. And I say that knowing that some of my team will listen to this, so I carry the risk of me saying that. And secondly, don't be afraid to move jobs. It's really scary. But actually, by the time you've done your first week in your new job, you will be absolutely fine. But as long as you approach it as an adult and you are commercial in your approach, then it should be well received, even if they decide not to change it.
And hearing you say that, I think those actually apply equally to other sectors where people might want to be, you know, sectors where culture isn't so progressive, perhaps it's harder to change. There aren't so many trailblazing sort of organizations out there doing things a different way. Same things apply. You know, take a commercial stance on it. See yourself as an adult in the relationship. It's not employee-employer. Yeah, very good. Well, what's your biggest lesson been in this as a leader, James, over, you know, since you started?
So I think my biggest challenges I think we've had is, well, two. I'm going to go with two, actually. One is the flexibility every day, because you can plan your day out as a leader, in inverted commas, and it can change in an instant because people are people and, you know, things happen to them and life gets in the way. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, and this is a challenge that we've got at the moment, is a tendency to be defensive about what our next plans are. So when I look back at how bold, in inverted commas, we were even sort of setting up and the sorts of senior lawyers that we went after and the decisions we made in respect of expansion, actually, I think a lot of those came from the fact that we felt we didn't have that much to lose. Whereas now that we have, you know, 58 people and a proper profitable business and all of that, all of a sudden we've got this kind of precious thing that we built and we're afraid of dropping it. But my worry is that, you know, if we play too carefully or too defensively, we will I'm mixing my metaphors here, but smother it, and actually will end up being our kind of world's worst enemy. Now, the last thing we want to be is rash, of course, but I think that is our biggest kind of learning curve at the moment, is not to be stupid, but not to sort of sit and go, right, this is working, nobody move. Like that scene at the end of the Italian Job. Because I think if we're not careful, in increments, it will flatten off and then start to, go downwards. So I think that's going to be our biggest challenge over the next 12, 24 months. And of course, we need to get through the recession and the cost of living crisis. But hey, so is everyone.
Well, yes. It's very interesting, though. It sounds like that you had enormous courage, and I don't want to use the word. Say again?
Or stupidity. I mean,
well, I was going to say bravado.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Nicer word.
Kind of word.
Nicer word.
But in those early days, I can really see what you're saying about. And now you've got this lovely, precious thing you don't want to drop, and all those people in it you want to hold safely. How you keep the courage going as you grow, with a little flavour of prudency around it at the same time.
And that plays into the first point about flexibility, because I think there's a tendency that you sit and you go, well, this has worked really well. Even any of the things we've been talking about on this call, because it's worked well now, if we go to 100 or 125, who knows whether some of those things start to become problematic. And I think if we're not, and again, it's being self-aware enough, I think, to sit and say, well, hang on a second, just because it worked for 30 or 40, does it still work for 70 or 80? And having the flexibility and ability to go, well, yeah, that did work, but yeah, we could try this different thing. And that's, those two things go sort of hand in hand to a certain extent.
Yeah. It's been so interesting listening to you, James. Thank you. And so much of what you describe, I think, is relevant beyond the legal sector too for people. A final parting top tip. If someone wants to sort of sacrifice a sacred cow that might have been forever deemed to be true in their sector, you've done some really bold things in your organisation. What would your number one tip be for someone thinking, could we try something wildly different and new?
I think what we've been quite good at is asking ourselves, what's the worst that can happen? We are not going to war, thank God, unlike, several countries at the moment. I'm not going down a mine like my, great-grandfather had to do. The worst thing that happens is I might get shouted at by a senior colleague, or the culture doesn't change and I have to leave or set up on my own. Those are not bad things. So the kind of the fear of change, I think asking yourself, is it really that bad in terms of what could happen? I think that would be my number one top tip. Get a bit of perspective and give it a go.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, James. It's been fabulous to see you. Thanks for joining me today.
You're very welcome. Thanks so much for having me.
I loved my conversation with James. He has got so much energy, so much passion for the culture they're building at Hall Brown. So thank you, James, for joining me. I was really struck by the fundamental sort of assumptions and beliefs that he and Sam hold that are influencing the practices that they have put in place in the organisation. So, for example, he was saying, 99% of lawyers want to do a great job. You don't need to target them on their billable hours. They're going to work as best they can anyway, and create the best possible experience for their clients. So trust that, and instead put in practices that are going to really help them do that. I thought the performance heat map was another great example of the mindset, the leadership mindset that they are approaching their culture with. So, of course, they look at performance across the board, but they are curious about it. They use the heat map to get under the skin of, so where is performance great and why? What's going on? Where does it look on the surface as though there may be room for more? What's going on there? But they know that data doesn't tell the whole story. And they need to have the conversations to really understand it. The other thing that I loved was looking forward, how James described that they're going to have to keep learning, as they grow as an organisation, as they get to grips with hybrid working. They really are going to have to adopt a growth mindset, a learning mindset of working out what's going to work going forward, where are they going to need to flex as they hire more people and grow. So yeah, thank you, James. Fantastic episode. If you need help to crack your culture, get in touch with us, podcast@pecanpartnership.co.uk. Please do subscribe. If you've listened to us on Apple or Spotify, leave us a review. That helps us get the podcast out to a wider range of people who will find it useful. If you've watched us on YouTube, please drop a question or comment into the comment section. Thank you very much.